Hello Hwa Chong students. In this video, I'll be showing you how the main policy that Singapore uses in order to solve cyclical unemployment. Okay, the first thing again to note is how does cyclical unemployment occurs in Singapore. Let me use the ADAS curve to illustrate the scenario. Okay, so again, the y-axis is general price level. The x-axis is real national income. You draw your AS curve, okay, and the AD curve. So let's say this is the original Singapore scenario. This AS-AD curve refers to Singapore. Okay, so let's look at what happened in the year 2009. What happened during the subprime is that US went into a recession. Okay, so as US went into a recession, their income level fall. And when the income level fall, the demand for our exports will also fall. So as our exports fall, the AD curve shifts to the left. Okay, shifts to the left. So you can see we started from YE1 and now we are at YE2. Okay, where the YF is here. Okay, as you can see, the gap between our equilibrium income and our full employment income has gone up. Okay, so this shows an increase in cyclical unemployment. Okay, so one obvious policy is of course to push the AD curve back. Okay, let me call this AD1 to AD2. Okay, so one obvious policy is to use an expansionary demand management policy to push the AD2 curve back to AD1. But we all know that in Singapore, demand management policies do not work as well. Why is that the case? First, the X minus M is such a huge component of our AD curve that any attempt by our Singapore government to increase G, to increase C, will have very little impact on our AD curve. The second reason is that our multiplier is very small. So when our multiplier is very small, again, the use of demand management policy will not be so effective to push the AD curve back. So we cannot use demand management policy. So what kind of policy can we use to help to minimize some of the cyclical unemployment? The policy that we mainly use here is our supply side policy, specifically the wage policy. Now, there are three types of wage policy you can think about. Number one is our flexible wage scheme. Okay, that's the first wage policy. The second is a cut in the employer's CPF contribution. And of course, the final policy that came out in the year 2009 was the job credit scheme. Okay. As we all learn, right, the AS curve, especially the short-run AS curve, takes into account the aggregate cost of production. So when you have a flexible wage scheme, it's pretty clear-cut. You allow the firm to cut the wages of the workers they hire. When that happens, okay, the aggregate cost of production that the firm faces would fall. This will lead to the fall in our AS curve from, okay, let me call this SRAS1. It will fall to SRAS2. Look what has happened. By the shift down of the SRAS curve, there's a movement along the AD2, so that now we are moving from YE2 to, let me call this YE3. What has a flexible wage scheme does? It has reduced our cost of production, and look, the gap between YF and YE has now become smaller. So what we are doing here is that we are actually offsetting some of the increased cyclical unemployment that is brought about by the fall in our net exports. Okay, let's now explain how our CPF policy works in Singapore. Let me use a new piece of paper. Now, let's say, for example, when you find work in Singapore, your monthly wage is 2,000. Okay, so this slide is to explain to you how our CPF works. Now, when you're paid 2,000 as your gross wage, okay, you have to contribute to your CPF account. that is known as the employee CPF contribution. So let me just assume that the employee's contribution is 20%. Okay. Now, with this 20%, it means that you have to contribute 20% of 2,000. Okay, that will be 400. 400 will go into your CPF account, which gives you 1,600 as your take-home wage. The thing you got to know about our CPF system is that there's also an employer's contribution. Okay, the firm that hires you will have to also contribute to your CPF account. So for simplicity, let's keep it to the same percentage, 20%. So this means that other than the 400 that goes in your CPF account, the firm will pay another 400, okay, to be deposited into your CPF account. Okay, so from this perspective, the firm's cost of hiring you is not just 2,000. Okay, it's not just this gross wage. It's actually 2,000 plus his employer's contribution. So it's 2,400. Okay, so during 2002, okay, during September 11, we actually cut the employer CPF contribution. Okay, so you can see how policy 2 works here. Okay, by allowing this employer's contribution to be cut, okay, let me cut it to 10%. Okay, now instead of having to contribute 400 to your CPF, the firm only need to contribute 200. So his wage cost now under the new employer CPF contribution is 2,200. So from his perspective, from the firm's perspective, the cost of hiring you has just gone down. So if you go back to the old note, okay, so as the cost of hiring you goes down, this will also shift the SRAS 1 to SRAS 2, thereby achieving the same fall in the cyclical unemployment. Now, job credit scheme works in a similar way. Okay, with job credit scheme, okay, let me switch back to the old note. Okay, firstly, under policy 2, you can see that when there's a cut in the employer CPF contribution, okay, your CPF account actually does not go up as much when the employer CPF contribution is cut. Now, the job credit scheme is a bit different here in the sense that the employer still give you 20%. Okay, so it will still give 400 to your CPF account. But the employer can then claim a bit of this CPF contribution from the government. Okay, so suppose the job credit scheme allows the firm to claim, let's say, half of the employer's CPF contribution. What this does is that after paying 400 into your CPF account, the job credit scheme allows the firm to claim back 200 or half of that 400 from the government. So from the firm's perspective, his cost of hiring you is now also 2,200, but you benefit by having the same CPF amount every month into your CPF account. So you can see that both of these policy works basically by lowering the aggregate cost of production. Okay, so all these three schemes work by cutting the cost of production to the firm by shifting SRAS 1 to SRAS 2, and this will cause the rise in the cyclical unemployment to be much less. But as you can see, right, no wage scheme can actually totally restore back the original contribution. So we have to wait for the US to recover before the 82 can finally shift back to 81. Okay, but this is what we do in the meantime to minimize the cyclical unemployment.